Ladies and gentlemen, for me, it's a great honor and pleasure to have been given the opportunity to speak to you today and to help, I would hope, to put the work of this conference in context, in the context that I can see where I sit. It's only possible, as Andrea has already explained, because Mrs. Cruz has been called by other duties to the far side of the American continent, so she couldn't get to Palermo today. Nonetheless, I'm very grateful. I think that the choice of the organizers to bring us to Sicily is a masterly one, because when they made the decision, the events that have only just begun to unfold in some parts of the shore of the Mediterranean could not have been precisely predicted. But I think that sitting in Brussels in a sort of bureaucratic ivory tower, it has always been my feeling that we have to move to change perspective, we have to go local, we have to take our personal preoccupations elsewhere than where we usually sit in order to get the right perspective. And I think that for all of us, I hope, participating in a conference like this, moving away from the so-called center, which happens to be for me in Brussels, to Sicily is a great way of changing perspective. So I think that the other way to look at perspective, as Roberto Viola has already said, is the timetable. Here we are saying happy 50th birthday to an organization which builds Europe. And I think that one of the reasons I personally wanted to come is that you can't build Europe without people. And it is the personal commitment of time and effort of all those in the room and those who've not been able perhaps to join today that builds not only the federation, but the connections between people across the European Union and beyond, which are the very essence of what the founding fathers of the endeavor had in mind. So I think that the spirit of feeling good about the existence of a federation like this is important, and also the challenge, as several speakers have said, what shall we do together for the future? I want to just quickly touch on three things. Firstly, what is this digital agenda for Europe, and how can a Federation of Engineers help us to achieve the goals? Secondly, the research agenda, and how can that be improved going forward? And thirdly, back to people, the individual citizens, the customers, but also you as a federation, and how we can work together. If I start with the digital context, the digital agenda for Europe is only a little over a year old. Mrs. Cruz, who is nothing if not a manager, has given us, somewhere in my pocket I have it, the key performance indicators which we carry around so we know what we have to achieve. And it's not easy. It's particularly difficult at a time when we are distracted by turmoil, economic turmoil in Europe and beyond, but also social turmoil. And I think too often when we work out what are our priorities, we think, well, the economy has to recover first, but our societies can't necessarily always wait for the economy to recover. So there is an urgent need. And as other speakers have said already this morning, although ICT could, on a narrow definition, be said to be less than 10% of GDP, ICT is the driver for over half of productivity growth in Europe. ICT is going to be the enabler of change in all the areas where we have to transform the way we do things, health and government and education and. If we do not transform the way we do things, we will not step away from a path which for Europe is muddling through rather than continuing to grow and be a leading player at global level. So the stakes are very high, and the technologies which you collectively own are the necessary success factor in all of that. The key point I wanted to touch on, and others have already touched on it, particularly Luigi Gambardella, is the broadband agenda. It's clear that both the networks and the applications need more bandwidth, and that access to high-speed broadband infrastructure is crucial, therefore, for economic recovery. The three thresholds which the European Parliament and Council have ministers have adopted are to give basic broadband to everybody more or less now, they say 2013, and there we're not doing too badly, to get 30 megabits per second across Europe by 2020, and within that to have half the subscriptions in Europe at 100 or better. Now that last bit gets increasingly ambitious, and different estimates of overall cost have been thrown out. We can get to 30 for the whole of Europe, for 500 million citizens, for about 40 billion. Estimates of what it would cost to add in the essentially fiber-based 100 mega run up to 300 and beyond, but we reckon about 250, 270 as a main cost. These sounded very big figures in April 2010 when I had to sign off the paper and say this is what we propose. Having seen the amount of money we throw at our banks, I have to say that it looks perfectly manageable. And as Roberto Viola said, these are investments that are multipliers. You don't pay that and you buy a car and it gets old and you throw it away. You pay that and obviously you have to keep the network going. Everything else gets better as well. And the OECD estimate is that if you use the highest speed broadband to transform society, in 10 years you break even. And 10 years is a reasonable rate of return on social investment. So the problem is not that the proposition is too expensive. People are signing checks of that size. It is not that the technology doesn't exist. It is the collective political will to realize that it's useful. And places like Sicily, as well as people like the Federation, can make the case from an academic case that we in this room will accept but that won't actually be delivered, to a case that is compelling. The sort of example that Luigi quoted from Trento is one way forward. The one I wanted to quote was from a small, poorer, more isolated region of northern Spain, Asturias. In Asturias there are 2,500 small dairy farmers. They weren't connected at all. They might have a phone. By cooperation between the network provider, a hardware provider, and the local health laboratories, dairy processors, and the farmers' organization, we now have, in that part of Europe, and this is completely bottom-up, not the public sector didn't think of this, but those 2,500 farmers now all have high-speed mobile broadband, use it every day, get detailed accounts of milk quality for each cow in their holding, get better prices for their milk as a result, can negotiate better the prices of their inputs. And now they want to take that example and roll it out. And they are not just 2,500 economic operators, it's 2,500 families in 1,000 small villages at the end of roads. And I think that we have to find those best practice examples, so the one that Luigi mentioned, something like that. There will be others in the countries you know best. Bring them together and spread them out. So that's broadband. It's important, it's doable, but we need bottom-up entrepreneurship and cooperation to achieve it. Secondly, research. There are many people delivering papers in this conference who are the regular partners of my expert colleagues in the execution of research across the ICT program in Europe, and therefore the first thing I would like to say on that is that the papers that you are looking at are not just excellent, as the organizers have already said, but they're directly relevant to the digital agenda. So one of the challenges for you as an academic conference is comment on the papers, but the other challenge is to get the conclusions you reach out of the academic, out of the publication process, and accelerate the linkage into the discussions we're already having in Brussels between non-engineers about what is the network topology, what is its relationship to regulatory challenges, net neutrality, quality of service, measuring customer satisfaction. These are areas where the cutting-edge insights that you're going to generate today are needed. The other thing we need is your support to get a sustained funding for research in the next 10 years. Between now and next summer, the Parliament and Council will decide the research budgets for Europe through to 2020, which means, as you know, the funding for projects, some of which will only finish in 2025. So the next 12 months are a crucial period to make the case with anybody you know at home, literally your local MEP, member of the European Parliament, your local national contacts, your local journalistic and media actors. They need to know what you as engineers think about the European research agenda. It doesn't have to all be positive, but they need to understand what's at stake. On the Commission side, we have proposed a significant increase in funding for research, while cutting back on some other European programs such as agriculture. And within that, we're proposing a significant increase for ICT. Now, the decision makers are not the Commission, it's the Member States and the Council. So I think that as well as doing your contribution to knowledge building in the technology sectors, please think about telling non-engineers who may be closer to the decision making what is needed for this to continue. In terms of the third point I wanted to talk about, which was the future for us as people, I would firstly like to agree but not repeat what Roberto and Luigi have said about the regulatory agenda. It is extremely important that regulators, which are now federated at the EU level, hear from engineers as well as the general public what are the parameters within which they operate. There can be a lot of political pressure on a regulator, but not enough technical input. One example that I would quote sort of quasi off the record is I wonder whether the Netherlands legislators currently thinking about net neutrality have really been briefed by engineers about what it means. And I think there's a need to reconnect there. But fundamentally, the challenge on the regulatory front is very much, as my colleagues have said, I don't want to go into that again, simply to say that if anything, we have not enough Europe, so the degree of cooperation between regulators is not strong enough. And between regulators, we probably have not enough technical input in each and every country. In some countries, it's admirably organized and some not. So another thing you could work on. For the customer, what do consumers want? I just wanted to say one thing, which is that as I read the agenda for your whole conference, you are pressing all the right buttons. What citizens need are intuitive ways into using new technology, and they need honest metrics to mirror their experience. Too often at the moment there is a gap between advertising maximum feasible speeds and the experience we have as we drive around town or as we plug in and get frustrated in an evening. Those sorts of issues which are on your agenda are crucial. Privacy, security, good governance, including at the global level, these are all issues which we will be discussing in Brussels and globally in the next months, and I think the papers that are here at the conference can help. The last thing I wanted to say was, what about the Federation? What's the future? Eric Schmidt, who like Roberto is an engineer, said in a speech in Scotland recently, isn't it great I'm an engineer and I'm in charge, as it were. And I think that if I have I'm a historian, so I'm not an engineer, but if I had a prejudice, it is that the technological expertise of Europe, not only is it not respected enough, but it's not proactive enough. The voice is not heard. You go back 150, 200 years, engineers were very much on top everywhere. It's not so consistently the case today. So my first part of the vision as a non-engineer is the Federation should have a goal that engineers are on top. Secondly, I think that you have to help the rest of society to get real benefits from the public research and technological innovation that you are acting for. And again, I think that we see more of this in some national societies across Europe than others, advertising the value of your technologies. But thirdly, I would echo, and I was discussing this, Andrea, with you last night, that I would echo Luigi's point that you have to connect not just more between engineers, but between engineers and other actors in the debate. Between engineers, I would say the geographical spread in the room is great, but I would like to work with the Federation to empower engineering communities in all the EU member states and beyond to be part of this conversation. I'm sure that together we can do better than that, on that. And secondly, I think that the networking between your federation and other actors in the digital stakeholder community could also usefully be built up, because that will bring the technical voice into the hearing of others. Final point, in the digital agenda we have 30%, what Nelly Cruz calls 30% of Europeans are digital virgins. That's where the digital divide is. And where are they? It's the poor people. There are a lot of poor people. It's the illiterate. It may be those who are out of work. Also, it can be part of youth. Young people get new technology, but not all youth gets it in their hands. If I look at this room, I'm a man, so are most of you. There is a gender divide, which in the engineering and sciences area, we have to have an agenda to change. We have to try to fix that. So I think that there are many things there where the, if you like, pro bono outward-facing work of a federation can help us in the next 50 web years, just as it's helped you, I'm sure, to get to where you are today. I've been rather longer than I planned. I apologize for that, but thank you again for the opportunity.